Good afternoon. We are live streaming this talk as well this afternoon, just so that everybody's aware. My name is Beth Carter. I'm the curator here at the Bill Reid Gallery, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon for a curatorial tour of the Keeping the Song Alive exhibition. And I'm joined by my co-curators, Cheryl Wadhams and Michael Schwartz, and we'll introduce us, each of us in a moment. To start off, we always like to say how much we appreciate that the Bill Reid Gallery is located on the unceded ancestral territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And this is so important to us that we are an Indigenous organization and sharing stories of culture, art, and history here at the museum. And we just so appreciate being here each and every day. As I mentioned, the Keeping the Song Alive has been co-presented by the Bill Reid Gallery of Northwest Coast, working with the Jewish Museum and Archives of BC. And this is an unusual pairing for us. Usually we're working with other Indigenous organizations, but we'll tell you a bit of the story of what led to this partnership in a few minutes. And we would like to thank our presenting sponsor, Blue Shore Financial, as well as our exhibition supporters, Heritage BC, the Metro Vancouver, the Azrieli Foundation, the Jewish Foundation, the Harbour Air Seaplanes, Rosedale on Robson, the BC Arts Council, the BC Government, and the City of Vancouver for supporting this exhibition. So without further ado, we are excited to share this exhibition. I think it's been a really fascinating story, and we had a lot of ups and downs in the creation, mostly due to COVID, of course. We were all excited to get going and going out into the community to speak with people when COVID arrived, and we had to rework our plans. So just to back up, as the curator here at the gallery, I was at a conference, I think, and I bumped into Michael, and he was telling me about this wonderful story of Ida Halpern, who was a Jewish immigrant to Vancouver and who had done a lot of work with the Indigenous communities in Vancouver. And she had just received this great honor, which was to have her work recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage on the UNESCO Canada World Heritage Register. And he thought that this was something that the Jewish Museum was interested in doing a project. But Michael, butt in if I say anything wrong. At this time, the Jewish Museum does not have a gallery space, and so we decided to partner because I said, well, here we're telling a really wonderful Indigenous story as well as the story of this important Jewish immigrant to Canada, and that's what led to our partnership. So I would like to maybe introduce Cheryl first. Cheryl, why don't you come in here? I'm going to hand you the microphone. You don't have to, but okay.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Ingila Kasla Nu Kwakwaka'wakw Cheryl Wadhams. Gayuklin Lach Map Tagila Glu Namgis Glu Mamalilakla. So greetings and welcome everybody. I wanted to introduce myself in Kwakwaka'wakw, which is the nation that I come from. I'm connected to 3 tribes in the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation through my grandmother. So I'm connected to the Namgis First Nation, connected to the Mamalilakla, and the Mamptagila people. So yes, thank you again and welcome.
And Cheryl worked with us as our guest curator for the show, and it was essential for us to have her with us because she has so many relationships within the community, and it was really a pleasure to work with you.
Mine as well. Yeah, here I'll pass this to Michael.
I have my own. As mentioned, I'm Michael Schwartz. Up until about a few months ago, I was Director of Community Engagement at the Jewish Museum and Archives of BC, and in that role, had the opportunity to put together a number of interesting exhibits, including this one. As Beth mentioned, we ran into each other early during the thought process development of this exhibit, and it made perfect sense to do it together. And it's been a real thrill to work with everyone, with Cheryl and with Beth. to travel up and down the island, to meet so many generous people from the community who are willing to share their stories and their artwork and their memories with us, to create this exhibit. So I'm thrilled that you've come to join us today, and looking forward to showing you around and telling you a little bit about behind the scenes of how it all came together.
Cheryl, I did want to just acknowledge before we go any further that we could not have done this exhibition without the support of two very important families, the family of Mungo Martin. So Chief David Knox, on behalf of the Chief Mungo Martin family, worked with us and supported the work that we're doing and presenting. And for the Chief Billy Assu family, Sonny Assu, Brad Assu, and the Assu family were also extremely supportive, and we thank them, all of these extended family members, for their support and also the approval to move forward in sharing these stories from their family. So to start with, we're going to just, Cheryl's just going to tell you a little bit about potlatch and what that means to the community, which is sort of fundamental to understanding the exhibition, and then we'll move into the exhibition and take a look around.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks. Hi again. Just to give a little bit of background on potlatching and the potlatch ban that happened after, and kind of what's happening today. So back in 1985 until 1885 to about 1951. So it was about 66 years. I kind of did the math. It looked to be about 3 to 4 generations. There was a potlatch ban that was enacted by the Canadian federal government, which forbade our people here in British Columbia from practicing our potlatches. Potlatches to our people, from what I understand and learned through my family, are very important part of our entire culture, part of our families. Potlatches are normally held by chiefs and their families, and they host potlatches to mark important dates. So the birth of a child and giving their first name. There's coming of age ceremonies that happen at potlatches. There's weddings and unions between different tribes that happen at potlatches as well. Just to note, one of our elders, I know he's always trying to help me remember to say pasa, and pasa is basically, it translates to give. So potlatch in our way is called pasa. So marking ceremonies, as well as when a chief dies or when a family member dies, we have memorial potlatches as well. So basically, it's a way for chiefs and families to be able to pass on the cultural rites and dances and songs and our heritage down to the next generation, as well as so it basically is a way for us to identify ourselves and solidify who we are and where we come from. So in our Kwakwaka'wakw Nation, I believe there's about 19 tribes. I think there was about up to 26 tribes before, but now I think there's about 18 or 19 tribes. So so when you receive a name, like you would get a name when you're 10 months, you would get your hair cut, and you would get your first name, and that would basically connect you to that family lineage. And then the same thing goes on when you have your coming of age, you would get another name. When you get married, you'll get another name from the other families as well to show those connections. So these were very important ceremonies to our people. So in 1885, the federal government enacted the potlatch ban, which later it happened that there was prosecutions that happened. There was our chiefs were sent to jail for having potlatches. Some of our chiefs, they went underground, of course. I'm sure some people may know that, but some of our chiefs disguised, their potlatches during the Christmas holidays or Easter holidays, and Christmas they would, wrap the gifts that they were giving to the people who were witnessing the ceremony in Christmas paper and then give those out. They would hold their gatherings at at a tea party or a birthday party kind of thing, but the chiefs would proceed with their ceremonies in secret. Not all chiefs did that. There are some chiefs that still did that, so which was a great thing. So as well as I forget.
Well, I think, too, what happened is that it meant that people couldn't gather and that the oral traditions were disrupted,
Oh, yes,
right?
yes,
Yeah.
thanks. Yeah, that's right, yeah. Thanks. Yeah, so, along with the potlatch band,
This is a curator's tour of the exhibit. You're
there
welcome
was,
to join.
Yeah, that's what they said.
Yeah, come on
our
in.
chiefs were sent to jail. There was an entire loss of culture. We lost all of these traditions. Things were forgotten, songs were forgotten, our way of life was forgotten, and language was a big thing, as well as, so where was I going with this?
Drumming.
Oh, yeah, the drumming, singing, dancing as well. So, yeah, sorry, I'm a little nervous. Okay. So I could note on a personal note that my great-grandfather, his name was Chief Amos Dawson, so he was one of the head chiefs in Village Island, so my grandmother's father. He was part of that well-written story of the Dan Kramer potlatch that was in Village Island, where the chiefs went to jail. It was well documented. So my grandfather was there, and he actually did go to jail for like 2 months or 3 months or something like that. And my late auntie Emma Dawson, Tamlin, she told me a story. I believe her family would have told her, probably her aunts or maybe her mother, who was around at that time, said that when Chief Amos Dawson went to jail, they were treated very, very badly. The chiefs were treated very badly. They had to strip their clothing, and they had sprayed them with something, and they weren't fed properly. These were big chiefs in our nation. So, and they were just very, they were belittled. So, there was one woman from our nation that did come down to Vancouver, and she used to make food for them and bring food. It was at the Ocala prison down here in Vancouver where they were. And she ended up, when they were released, she would buy suits for them so that they would have suits for when they left the jail. And I remember my aunt telling me one time that the words that Chief Amos Dawson said, that he felt like the lights went out when the potlatch ban happened, and when that time happened, when he went to jail, it was like, with that little string, when they pulled the string on the lights and the lights went out kind of thing. So, yeah, it was kind of a really sad time for our people. Yeah.
Could you talk just a little bit about the regalia and the masks as well?
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Okay, yeah. So, I'll talk a little bit about the regalia and mask and how that's connected to our culture. So, traditionally, our button blankets or button robes, they were made from fur, and they were decorated with like abalone shells. And nowadays, and after contact and trade with the Hudson's Bay Company, we now use many of our people use wool blankets. So and they're decorated with like mother of pearl shells, and some of us still use abalone on our button blankets as well. And we have like a crest, so there's a crest design that goes on the back of the button blanket that identifies what tribe you're from. So for me, I'm from the Mumptagila, first from the Mumptagila tribe, and our crest is the Kulus, which is what I'm wearing today. I think it's like the baby brother to the thunderbird. So it's a mythological creature in our way, but this tells a story of the origins of our people. So when we display this on our button blankets or have it on our aprons, it tells us again of who we are and where we come from. This design actually was from a potlatch in 2017 for one of our young chiefs, Andrew Wadhams, and actually John Livingston, who is Maxine Mattlepe's late husband. He's the one that designed this for their family. So I thought I would wear this today in honor of both of those people. So, yeah.
You're going to hear a lot more as we go through the exhibit. I think we want to just, knowing a little bit about the potlatch and the importance and how intrinsic it was for the community, it really helps set the stage for understanding the work that Ida Halpern did with these two chiefs, Mungo Martin and Chief Billy Assu. And so with that, let's go down. If you can all come down to the end of the gallery near the elevator, that would be great. We're a narrow space, so
Come on
please do
in.
come in so that you can see the items that are in this section here. We're a perfect size group for this space. Thanks so much.
We have three key figures in this is kind of the historical section of the exhibit, and as we move forward, we reconnect with the present. But here we have our three key historic figures who kind of set this story in motion. And it's a story of a series of relationships between Dr. Ida Halpern, who's an Jewish ethnomusicologist from Vienna, Chief Mungo Martin, and Chief Billy Assu, who are both two really highly respected chiefs locally here from the Kwakwaka'wakw nation. Dr. Ida Halpern grew up in Vienna, and as a student there in the early part of the 20th century, studied ethnomusicology during a time when there was a real renaissance of musicology happening there. The faculty at the University of Vienna were really pushing the limits, and she was very fortunate to study under some really historically impressive scholars. She had been a very good piano player as a child and had dreams of becoming a concert pianist, and showed the potential that she could possibly do that. And then an injury when she was about 18 left her in the hospital for a year, making her lose some function in her fingers and lose her opportunity to practice. And so that went sideways, and she instead ventured into musicology. Soon after, the Anschluss occurred, which is when Nazi Germany took over Austria. To say they invaded would suggest that there may have been some resistance. There was none. It was just annexed. And as a result, many Jews got out of there as soon as they could, if they had the ability to do so. So Ida Halpern and her husband George fled. They were looking all around for somewhere to go. They were struggling to get a visa and find somewhere that would take them in. And George's sister was living in Shanghai as a psychologist there, teaching there. And so they were able to go and join her there. They only stayed for a few months, maybe a year. It wasn't really working out, and so they came back to Vienna and eventually made it here to Vancouver. And Ida Halpern, upon arriving here, got involved in the musical community here, particularly the classical music community. She started the Friends of the Chamber Music Society, which is still happening now. I believe it's having its 75th anniversary, and became a major institution. She taught music appreciation. She taught a distance course through UBC, and eventually started up some of the programs in the musicology department there. She also was a music critic for the local paper, The Province, and on the radio on CBC, and she always made pains to kind of explain to her audience what was going on in the music and generate appreciation for the history and the technique and what was happening in the music. In addition to all this effort on classical European music, she had a great passion for traditional musics, and worked for years to establish a relationship with local indigenous leaders to be able to record and document their song. And after about 8 years of work, she established communication with Chief Billy Assu, who invited her up to join him at his home in Alert Bay and record him singing. He said, "I will sing you 100 songs." And so she went up there, and if we turn around, we can see the recorder that she brought with her. She would have had to carry like a suitcase, on a float plane, on a boat, on a hike through the trails, and she brought it up there, and over the course of a week, they recorded 88 songs. With Chief Assu's blessing, he opened the door for her to make contact with other chiefs and other leaders. One of the primary, most important ones was Mungo Martin. A few years later, he was at UBC, working on their poles, restoring the poles that they had and making new ones. And so during that time, Mungo Martin and his wife established a friendship with the Halperns, who lived close to UBC, and recorded many, many more songs. So a selection of these songs were released on a series of records from Smithsonian Folkways. We have one here. This one is from, I believe, 1967. The remainder were released through the 70s into the early 80s. 4 double disc box sets like this that have a selection of the recordings that Dr. Halpern made, either on the engraved acetate or on reel-to-reel, which we have some examples of here. As mentioned earlier, when she was getting on in years, she donated her collection to the BC Archives, and in 2017 it was submitted by the Archives to be inscribed in the Canadian UNESCO World Heritage book registry. So yeah, that's the story of Ida Halpern. The recordings that are available through the Smithsonian website, are streaming now, are available at the BC Archives, and they are one of the pieces that has helped the community bring back the traditions and learn the dances and songs. We'll keep going.
Great. I just love, we've had lots of people comment on this recording device, and it does look like a suitcase. It was the tip of technology in 1947 when she first started doing these recordings. And of course now we do so much recording on our iPhones or digital devices in our pocket. So the idea of this middle-aged woman lugging around this device that's over 50 pounds and wearing her, we've had descriptions of her wearing her pearls and her, city clothing and schlepping it up to remote places in BC. It's quite a strong image in my mind and shows her dedication to this process. So she's really a fascinating person. And if any of you are interested in learning more about Ida, we did a talk with one of her students who worked very closely with her a couple of weeks ago, and that is also recorded and available through our website. So you can get a lot more nuanced understanding of her. What's interesting is that in the 1940s and 50s, that the recording that Ida then did with these wonderful chiefs was actually illegal. The Indian Act, the potlatch ban, as Cheryl had described it, did not end until 1951, and Ida started her recordings in the mid-1940s with the chiefs. So really, she recognized that even by asking these chiefs to sing these songs for her, she was asking them to break the law. And they understood that that was also, but they saw the importance of it. The recording process came about that she had met Chief Billy Assu and started to befriend his family. And she asked him, what will happen to these many songs that you have? And he said, well, they'll die with me. And she said, well, that doesn't have to be the case. If you are willing, I can work with you and we can record the songs and they can be preserved for future generations. Part of what is important to understand is that by this time, the 1940s, the potlatch ban had been in effect for over 60 years, and this is multiple generations, as Cheryl mentioned. And he, even though Chief Billy Assu had 3 sons, these sons had been taught not to that it was bad to be engaged with the potlatch system. So they were probably quite aware because their dad had been doing potlatching in secret, but you couldn't do the real community-based potlatching that had been happening before 1885. So his sons had gone to residential school. They had been taught they were working in business. They were doing a lot of other things. They weren't interested in preserving the songs, and these songs would have been preserved through oral tradition. So you would have just listened to them over and over and over again, and that's how you would learn them. So the work that Ida did to come and preserve the songs, these hundreds of songs, was really instrumental in helping the community continue to potlatch, and now we're thrilled that potlatching is really resurging now. Ida was not the only person doing that sort of work at this time. There were other artists, like we have a couple of paintings here on the wall. This is Chief Henry Speck from Turner Island, and then Chief Lloyd Wadhams Sr., who were both using painting and painting ancestral stories, traditional masks, dances, and regalia as a means to help preserve some of these traditions. And we have in this section, we've had a great opportunity with the help of Heritage BC. We received a grant to help us travel, the 3 of us, up Vancouver Island. We went to Campbell River, Port Hardy. Cheryl, help me. It's Taki. I always say it long. Takis and Takis and Alert Bay, and speak with a wide range of people. We met with Mungo Martin's great-great-grandson, and we also met with other Sonny Assu and other family members who helped share stories with us to really help us better understand the influence of Ida Halpern's recordings. So you see on these panels on the wall are narratives from each of the people we spoke with, and we did quite lengthy interviews, and I just can't appreciate enough how willing they were to share their ideas and thoughts. Many of these people are from potlatching families where potlatching was pushed underground, but it never ever went away. But even then, they remember listening to Ida Halpern's recordings, and that helped trigger something for them in the 60s and 70s and 80s after the potlatch ban had ended. But even after the ban ended, there was a lot of fear and reticence to go back into potlatching right away because, you know, it had been forbidden for so long. And then also there's a lot of coordination and financial burden and understanding that's required from the community in order to do that. So Cheryl's going to talk a little bit in a minute about some of Maxine Madelpy's role within that. If you have a chance after the tour, please do take some time to listen. You can listen to some of the recordings. There's a wonderful short film of Mungo Martin and his work that he did. There's also an interview with Ida Halpern that she did with the CBC talking about her recording project. And then we have some modern films done quite recently of young people today starting to get back into understanding the singing, the dancing, the drumming. The other thing I'll just mention, you probably are already understanding it, but the very first thing when we started interviewing the community was the songs. They said the songs do not exist by themselves. The songs are matched together with the regalia, the ancestral rites, and the status of the families. And what else would you say? The drumming, the dances, the regalia, and the songs all come together as a unit. So if the songs had disappeared, the others couldn't exist, and vice versa. So we're very lucky that many people were working to preserve these things together. So Cheryl is going to move over here and talk about some of this wonderful clothing.
Thank you so much, Beth, for sharing all that information. That's just so wonderful. I just want to talk about just a little bit about our trip up to the traditional territories. So we the three of us went up to Northern Ireland, and we visited Takis, which is Fort Rupert. We visited Alert Bay, and we visited Campbell River as well. So it was such an impactful trip for me personally to be able to go into my own nation and talk to our, my people, my family members, and it was just such a wonderful experience. When we went to Fort Rupert to talk to Dave Knox, Chief Dave Knox, Gigamade Dave Knox, he was so wonderful, and he let us into his home, and he talked about everything. It's just the amazing work that they're doing up there. And he brought out his great-grandfather. He brought out his carving knives. So Mungo Martin was a carver as well, and he brought out his tools, and I was able to touch his tools. And for me, it was just over the top, because I am a wood carver as well. I was taught by my uncles, so traditionally taught, and was passed down from my uncles. And Lloyd Wadhams, who is one of the artists that's featured here on this wall here, was one of my teachers as well. So I thought I'd just put a little plug in for that. And I just wanted to mention too about talking to the community members. We ended up, when we went to Alert Bay, we were allowed to sit in on a community gathering, and it was based on language and culture for our youth and our families. And it was in the big house in Alert Bay. They had the fire going, and it was Andrea Kramer and her mother Vera Kramer who organized this. It was once or twice a week, and we happened to go on one of the days that they were there. And so they let us sit in a circle, and we introduced ourselves. And Kwakwaka'wakw, I did anyway. I'm a new language learner. I've been on this new language journey of learning Kwakwaka'wakw for about 5 or 6 years now. And it was so amazing to sit in this circle and be accepted in the circle. And one of the people that was sitting in the circle with us was Gyodi Nelson. And I've known Gyodi for a long time, and he was sitting across the fire, and I didn't see him right away, and he was sitting with his son, and they stood up, and they both introduced themselves, and was just, oh my God. And he told a story about listening to Ida Halpern's records when he was a little boy. And it was such an amazing story that he told. He told us that his aunt, when he was in preschool, and this was in the old residential school in Alert Bay, they had the preschool on the second floor, and then they had the band office on the first floor. And the band office happened to have one of the copies of the records in the office. So the teachers, that Vera and her sister, they went down and they borrowed the record and brought it up to the kids so that they can listen to the records. So he talked about listening to the record when the needle dropped on the record, and how scratchy that scratchy noise was, and then listening to Mungo Martin's voice singing the Hamatsa song. So they started teaching them the songs and the dances and passing it down. And this was probably like in the early to mid 70s. So that's where that spark happened again, where they were passing it down to the younger generation. So him bringing forward that story was just like, it just brought goosebumps, and it still does, telling his story. So I thought I'd put a plug in for that. So just talking about our community members. So we talked to Wayne Alford and Pee Wee Alford. This is a father and daughter. They're from one of the big potlatching families in our nation, so they practice regularly, passing down names and songs and traditions to their family members and keeping that really strong connection to our culture. It was so amazing to hear Pee Wee's journey of how she learned Kwakwaka'wakw. She's a fluent Kwakwaka'wakw speaker now, and she teaches in our community as well. So she's teaching the young kids in our community. She's working with Jody Nelson with a new organization called Nawala, which is like a cultural kind of a concept where they have a set up in our nation. You might want to look it up. I don't know a lot about it, but it's just amazing that they're teaching our young people right out there on our traditional territories, teaching the language. It's totally merged, and so it's amazing what they're doing today. Where it led from this potlatch band, where we were. I'll go back a bit. Where we were a thriving, community, thriving nations who were self-sustaining, and then going through the governmental laws and potlatch bans and all that to what we're doing today, with the help of, there's these individuals who are standing up and taking that lead. I just wanted to, give, a nod to them. So, as well, so I'll talk a bit about Maxine Matopy. We wanted to bring her in because, like Beth had mentioned, our songs and dances, our regalia, our traditions, they're all connected. Everything's connected. We're connected to our food because we have to feed the people when we do potlatches. So we have to go out and harvest, the salmon. We have to go and harvest the clams and the crabs, and we have to go and we have to feed the people when they come to the potlatches, or the chiefs and the host family do. And Maxine Matopy is I would consider one of our high-ranking ladies in our nation. And she's the daughter of Charlie Matopy, who was a chief of the Muptagila Nation, our tribe, and she is now a regalia maker, and she supports our community when we have potlatches. So her and her late husband, John Livingston, started this mission. I think it must have been about 30 years ago. She said that they wanted to start making just a few blankets for family members that didn't have regalia for the potlatches. So I think she said they started making like 5 aprons and 5 button blankets, and then it just snowballed from there. And I had the opportunity of sitting with her, or working with her in the back during a potlatch. And she told me they had, I think it was about 600 aprons that they had made at that time, and they had maybe 300 or 400 button blankets. So when she worked in the back, she brought all of this regalia with her for the potlatches, for the host chiefs and the family to use. So when they went out on the floor, they were not naked in a sense, that they were dressed, appropriately. So when they did all their songs and their dances, it was just a beautiful sight to see her regalia on the floor. And so these are 2 pieces that she has submitted for the exhibition. So this piece here is and both were designed by her late husband, John Livingston, and he was trained by the Hunt family in Fort Rupert. So he was a very highly respected artist and ally to our people, and was married to Maxine for many years. And he designed all of the regalia that they worked on together. And this is like a Chilkat style regalia, so like a robe, a Chilkat style robe. And it would be used by mainly, like a chief or a high-ranking person. They would put this on during a certain part of the potlatch ceremony at the very end. So there's different stages of the potlatch ceremony. So at the beginning of the potlatch, you would have the morning ceremony. So there was 4 songs that were sung to remember the people who have passed on. And then the last song was a song that was considered, it wiped away the tears so that we can continue our ceremonies. And then they had the second part. Is called the Tseka ceremony, which is the red cedar bark ceremony. So that's the part where they bring in the young hamatsa, and it's part of the young men initiation part. I don't know a whole lot about that, exact initiation part. I know the process, but it's basically they go out into the forest, and they're trained in this way. They bring them the young hamatsas out to the forest, and for like back then it was like weeks, and they would starve. You know, they would have to eat, forage whatever they could get out there, and they were supposed to try and connect to the animals and connect to nature, and in that process they became wild. You know, they became this. You know, they were hungry, and you know, and they became this wild person. So this process of initiation of a young boy, they would go and get this young boy and bring him back, and they would bring him through the front doors, and they would have this whole 4 songs 4 times around the fire. There's this whole connection to the number 4 is one of our sacred numbers. It represents the 4 corners of our big house, the 4 corners of the world, and and then they have like a third part of the ceremony. I can't remember. I lost my track of thought. Anyways, the last part is the tseka ceremonies, which are the peace dances, and usually they'll bring out regalia like this for the tseka ceremony. So I think the tseka represents the end of the ceremony, and it's to bring peace among the tribes, you know, to show the other tribes that there's peace among us. So so and then there's always an apron that's worn as well, and it would usually represent, like, they would have the crest of the family on there as well. So so this second piece here, this is a tunic. This is normally what would be worn by a chief. Again, as Maxine, she's a regalia maker, so she gets commissions from chiefs to make them regalia for an upcoming ceremony, and they would have to put their family crest on the front of it. So this one, it looks like it's a raven design. So it's all hand beaded. She does use industrial machines as well for sewing, because she's made so much regalia, and it's just a beautiful representation of textile making, traditional textile making. And these are both, this looks like it's a wool made out of Melton cloth, which is a common fabric that we would use for our traditional button blankets. And a more contemporary version, this is like a ultra suede, yeah, thanks Beth. So it's like an ultra suede, which is more modern. It's, you know, a lot easier to cut. The designs are easier to cut, and it's very vibrant and very durable as well. So, you know, our people, like, you know, anything, you know, we'll use the most, you know, recent tools of the trade that are available to. So some people are still traditionalists, like myself. Maxine, she does both. So, you know, it totally depends on the artist. So, and I guess we can just like touch on, I did a submission as well for this exhibition. So it's a more traditional style button blanket. This, I made it about 4 years ago, and I made it, it was supposed to be a practice blanket, and I wanted to just be light so I can just put it in a bag and go and practice, you know, with whenever we had, you know, practice singing and dancing or whatever here in Vancouver, and it ended up being a full-blown potlatch blanket, pasa blanket. And so it's made with mother of pearl buttons, and there's mussel shell buttons on here as well. These are hand cut mother of pearl buttons on there. And it has on the back, you can't really see it, but it has a Thunderbird design on the back. Short story that my late Auntie Kathy had passed away, and I inherited a button blanket that she had started, and her late brother Lloyd Wadhams did a outline of this design that's on mine, but didn't fill it in. It was just like a flat design. It was just sewed at the very top, and it was just hanging on her button blanket. So I ended up taking her design, and I finished the design. I put all the U shapes, you know, our typical U shapes and ovoids in there, and finished the design, and that's what I have on this blanket today. So, and the apron, it has a sea seal design, which is a sea serpent, which is another one of the crests of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation. Yeah, and I actually used like a different technique. Maxine used beads, and that's very hard and tedious work. It's just so fine, And this one I used just like a kind of like a cording, so it kind of looks like beads. So, and it was just a little bit easier for me at the time. So, and some, you know, back in the day, I talked to Maxine not too long ago, and she mentioned that aprons were, I guess they were, it was kind of competitive with our different tribes. So the more elaborate they were, you know, and the more that you could hear them, you know, the better, I guess. So some of the regalia makers, you know, they would put bells on theirs, and these are like brass bells that are on there, so they would make a nice sound. Some of them had like puffin beaks on them. Some of them had deer hooves. Sometimes they would use like the little jingle bells, like the old style jingle bells. So it just depends, you know. There's 1,000 ways to make an apron. So yeah. And I guess I could just mention just a little bit about the cedar bark headbands. So there's headbands on all of these pieces. So this cedar bark headband, I harvested the cedar bark myself from a tree. I went out with an elder. It was very hard work. I stripped it. I cut, you know, stripped all of the cedar bark by hand. So it's hand woven, and then it has an abalone shell on the front. It's also dyed red. So normally, like natural or inner cedar bark is like a kind of like a yellow kind of a color. So when we dye our cedar bark headdresses red, which goes back to, it connects to, traditionally it connects to women and how can I put this? The rights of women giving birth. So it connects back to the very beginning. Yeah. So, and then it has like a little ermine pelt, which is like a kind of like a what are those?
Small weasel.
Yeah, like a small weasel, and they're caught in our traditional territories as well. So there used to be trap lines for catching these. So that's what that's adorned on the top. So and the cedar bark headdress is usually used during the Tseka ceremony, which is the second part of the ceremony, and which is a very sacred part of our ceremony. So at the beginning of the ceremony, everyone puts a piece of cedar bark, just a strip of cedar bark today. Traditionally, we would use a full headpiece like this. Yeah.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Okay.
I would just like to mention this wonderful historic headdress that we have here in the exhibition as well, which is on loan from a private collection. It has been out of the country for almost 100 years. It was actually, we're very lucky that we know who made this. His name was Chief Bob Harris, and the headdress was actually recorded by Curtis, which is very special. In the 1920s, the photograph was taken of a man wearing this headdress. So it was in a private collection for many, many years and has only recently come back to Canada. And the current owner is now working with the Umista Cultural Centre in Alert Bay to return this piece back to the community. I think this is so important to talk about. The piece itself is absolutely magnificent. It is a loon, which would be like a seabird that dives in and out of the water, so it's kind of a transformation figure. And it also has the sisudal, which Cheryl, the double-headed sea serpent on it. So quite a important rankings for people wearing this headdress. But also with the potlatch ban, Cheryl mentioned the 1921 potlatch when many, many people were sent to jail, and all of the regalia from that potlatch was either destroyed or seized. So people were given a choice. They could either hand over their regalia to the government, or they could burn it. And many people chose to burn it. Others did turn over the regalia. It was seized by the government, and it then went into all sorts of museum collections, mostly back east, our National Museum, the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And in the 1970s, the Umista Cultural Center, which is based in Alert Bay, worked very hard to repatriate all of the belongings from that potlatch seizure, and that was the core collection that is now in the Umista Cultural Center. So we're thrilled that the collection and these very important items, belongings from the box of treasures of many families of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation. There's also a museum in Cape Mudge that cares for part of the collection as well. So these are now available to be for community members to engage with them again. And the Umista Center, I know, and I believe Cape Mudge also has a program where people who have the rights to these treasures can either borrow them, use them, or replicate them if they're too fragile to be used in potlatches anymore. So it's we've really turned a corner, and you may have heard of the term repatriation. Many museums around the world and in the States and Canada are working to repatriate belongings back to communities, because so much of what is in museums were taken. They might have been sold, but they were sold under duress, or they were taken illegally. So this is really helps to show tell this story that we're sharing with you, but it also tells the story of the revival of potlatching and among the Kwakwaka'wakw communities. So I'm going to just hand over to Michael. Michael hasn't got to speak for a while. We're going to go into more of the contemporary art section here in the exhibition.
If everyone could come down this way. So I'm going to tell you a bit about this piece of art by Andy Everson. I just wanted to mention that the trip that Cheryl and Beth both spoke about was amazing, first of all, and second, it was actually the BC Arts Council, just so credit is due, BC Arts Council made that trip possible, not BC Heritage, and they were extremely patient because we actually received the grant before the pandemic, and then they were very understanding and waiting over 2 years before we were able to use it. So can't thank them enough. Andy Everson is a member of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation. He's a contemporary artist. As you can see, he's relatively young. He's in his 40s. And this is a piece of art that he created a few years ago that has been exhibited in a few contemporary art galleries. And it represents his grandparents' dining room table, or their kitchen table where they would have tea. And as we've discussed, during the potlatch ban, people found creative solutions, if we can call it that. So they would have friends over for dinner, they would have ceremonies, they would handle what's called the business, so the naming or the agreements between families that is part of the potlatch ceremony. So without doing all the dances and the big theatrical elements of the potlatch, you were still able to find ways to handle the business of the potlatch in this situation. Andy mentions that later in the process, after the ban was dropped, his grandfather actually bought a reel-to-reel recorder to record those conversations, because they are part of the oral tradition, and so to be able to record them without having to write them down was a major part of that. And if we look to the bottom of the table here, just under here, we see a representation of the screen that appears at the back of the big house during a potlatch. So a real visual representation of the ceremony going underground. It's literally on the underside of the table. And it's made from the same materials that a traditional screen would be made from charcoal and mica flakes, which sparkle in the fire. Here we go.
Great. And Andy it does very interesting work, and he actually has an anthropology degree, so he's sort of bridging both the academic worlds and the traditional worlds, and he and his family are very active in potlatching nowadays. This is an actual reproduction of his family's ledger book, where they preserved the names and the business that was done when they were having to hide the potlatches. Another very important artist in the show is Sonny Assu, and Sonny is the great-great-grandson of Chief Billy Assu. So he has done a whole series of work related to his great-grandfather, Billy Assu. The Assu family is a very large, spread-out family, and Sonny actually was raised in the Lower Mainland and not that closely connected, but he has since moved back to Campbell River and building a lot deeper connections to his family. He was super inspired by these recordings for a long time, and so when we started this exhibition, the first person I thought of was Sonny Assu, because he has done a body of work about his grandfather. He got a set of the records on eBay, and he spends a lot of time listening to them as he creates his work as well. So there's a visceral connection right there. This work, I always forget the number, it's called 136 copper discs, or it is 136 copper discs, and it's called Ellipsis, and it is 136 pure copper discs. Copper is a material that has been used by Indigenous people up and down the Northwest Coast for millennia. You see copper shields there's one on the totem pole behind us, and it has been found in archaeological digs as ornamentation. So copper was a very valued material. It then, when Europeans first started arriving, they were bringing larger copper sheets in boats, and that allowed people to make larger copper items. So copper is a symbol of wealth and identity for many people, and there's a lot of gift giving is copper shields. So Sonny wanted to create 136 copper records to represent the 136 years of the potlatch band from the time it started to the time he made this piece. And each copper record is very, very heavy. So this pile of records, it's being shown on the wall, and it's also being shown as a pile of records to kind of illustrate the way gifts would be distributed in a potlatch. There's piles and piles of gifts that would be given out to the people who have attended the potlatch, and they're a way to recognize and thank the people who are there witnessing the event. So there's also an expression, I guess, for the Kwakwaka'wakw people that you can be heavy with wealth. And so this is heavy with rights and traditions. So this is literally heavy with the traditions of the Kwakwaka'wakw people. So for Sonny, the records represent his great-grandfather, the work he did, the importance and the value of the songs. So the songs themselves are seen as wealth, and I think he's a conceptual artist, so that's all kind of embedded. You can see many different avenues of ways to interpret the piece, this piece Ellipsis. For Sonny, the word ellipsis, the circular everything coming around, is also symbolic of what we're talking about in the show. The last thing I wanted to talk about is this idea of wealth for Kwakwaka'wakw people versus European approaches to wealth. For a potlatch, when a chief hosts a potlatch, they give away everything. They spend all their savings to host the potlatch and give away everything. They give everything in gifts, and they work until their pockets are empty, but they are, through the process of giving everything away, they are then gaining status and spiritual wealth in different ways. And of course, it's a reciprocal system that, you know, when the next potlatch, they attend a potlatch, they will receive support and wealth. So everybody is supporting each other, but it's the exact opposite of the way we consider wealth in European-based traditions, where we accumulate wealth, we put it into banks, we keep it for ourselves. It's not spread out within the community in the same way. And I think it's potlatches were fundamental to that sharing and sharing of wealth within the community. We have, I know we're going a little over time because there's so many wonderful stories to share. Michael's just going to talk about Sunny's other pieces, and then we'll just go back into the hummingbird room in case there's any questions for anybody.
Thanks, Beth. I should point out that ellipsis is also the three dots in a phrase that is like an unfinished sentence or a gap, right? So symbolic of the potlatch band. We had a really wonderful visit with Sunny up in Campbell River, and he was very generous, participating with the exhibit, contributing works. And we have two posters here. He's done a number of this style of work. Sorry, excuse me, folks. Back here is one of his pre-existing works, a poster advertising a music festival. So it's the potlatch kind of reimagined as a music festival, something very contemporary. He's got, instead of just Chief Billy Assu, he has Billy and the Chiefs, and banned by the Canadian government, strict law tour 2021, winter potlatch, Village Island, free admission. There are little symbols and jokes in both these works. You can see the little space holder that you'd use on a 45 record that's in the four corners of this piece as well. And the phrase, it says featuring the "We Must Dance" dancers. "We must dance" is a phrase that one of the old chiefs back at the turn of the 20th century reported to Franz Boas, who was a musicologist way back then. And the phrase is used in the sense of the settlers have their laws, well, we have our laws. We have a strict law that, you know, can't be broken, right? So that's the Strict Law Tour 2021 here. Across the top, door prizes, names, HBC blankets, Hudson's Bay Company blankets, feast, all ages. As Beth was saying, the chiefs would give everything away, and Hudson's Bay blankets were one of the commodities that they would give away to everybody. So we had this great conversation with Sunny, and he was generous to give us these pre-existing works, the poster and the ellipsis piece, to lend them for the exhibit. And he was so inspired by the conversation and the project and the whole thing that he created this brand new piece just for this show, an installation. We have here at the center a historic photo of Chief Billy Assu, Sunny's great-great-grandfather. We have, as I mentioned, the four record space savers in the corners. We have a turntable, like a DJ setup in the center there. Performed for preservation, banned under the Indian Act. Absolutely no Indian agents allowed. And it says across here, again, we see an appearance of Billy and the Chiefs. We have DJ Ida. Ancestors, all ages. And here we have figures that kind of appear in some of Sunny's recent works, as well as down here, of these kind of weird alien figures that we can understand as the settlers arriving in North America. And these five across here are the coppers. You'll note, those of you who can see the front of this totem pole can see it's exactly the same shape and those appear in a lot of the historic photos. And right at the top there, the Cave, which is a historic Vancouver pop music venue that actually was right across the street from here. And Sunday didn't even realize that it was right here as he was doing this work. So a nice little connection there. I think that's that. So
I'll
we're gonna
just
go-
add
yeah.
a wee story is that Sonny was inspired by some historic photos he had from his family showing them traveling to the city and having a chance to go to the Cave nightclub and listen to music and dance in the Cave nightclub, but then they couldn't go home to their own community and do music and dance in their home community. So that's one of the reasons he was inspired to do that. A cool little added thing. We forgot, Cheryl was just going to quickly mention this last little section here.
Of course, yes. Thank you, Beth. Thanks, Michael. Okay, so just to touch on this one last section of the Keeping the Song Alive exhibition. So this part of the exhibition, we wanted to include like what's happening today or what's happened since the potlatch ban was lifted. So this is a great example of what's happened in Vancouver in the urban setting. So it must have been back in like the early mid 1990s. There was a small group of our people, Rory Dawson, who's who's Kwakwaka'wakw from Kinkham, and Christine Baker. She's both Kwakwaka'wakw and Squamish. Her and a couple of elders had gotten together at the Vancouver Friendship Center in downtown Vancouver, and at that time it was kind of like nobody had regalia, nobody really knew about, was doing anything like traditional in Vancouver. They would have potlatches back home, but there was nothing happening in Vancouver to kind of pass that down to our kids down here. So they started the Urban Kwakwaka'wakw dance group, and it started very small, just with a couple of people, and it just grew. I joined the group in about 2000, and I was going to Langara. I was just starting my college degree there, and I ended up going to a feast. The Kwakwaka'wakw group was hosting a feast at the Friendship Center. So I brought a dish to share. I had made like a button blanket in my apron, so I ran down and I joined the group. Didn't know what I was doing. I just went on the floor with the ladies and I kind of copied what they were doing. And after that, they asked me if I wanted to join. So we had regular practices once a week. At the Friendship Center, so in the Simon Baker room, and Rory Dawson and some other singers would sit at an actual log, like you'll see in the Hummingbird space, and they would sit there and they would sing our traditional songs that they learned from back home. And Rory, he would be standing there, kind of coaching us newcomers to the group, how to dance. I had 2 left feet. I didn't know a thing about that. I was brought up by my grandmother, and she was too ashamed to talk about residential school and our history, and she was very humble. She was taught to not talk about or brag about who she was, and so a lot of that information was suppressed. I didn't know anything. So this group was a major part of my growth, learning about who I am and where I came from. And I have to credit Rory and Christine and all the other ladies and the young men who were teaching and sharing any knowledge that they had. So it was just and we're not really practicing with the Kwakwaka'wakw anymore. I think pretty much since 2020. I think at some point we're going to have to gather again, but this was an amazing time in Vancouver. So and the connection here is basically the group started singing songs from our nation. So songs from the certain families of the singers, they would sing them, and some of the families back home were getting kind of upset. They were singing these songs and saying, "Oh, you can't sing those songs. Those belong to our families." So Rory took the initiative, and he started teaching himself how to compose songs. So he is now a composer. He's composed dozens, at least a dozen or two songs now. Everything from entrance songs to paddle songs. He's done individual songs for certain people that he wanted to honor in his family. He's done a song for Christine Baker. Her traditional name is Kwakwaka'wakw. And if you go back to the middle section, you'll see her dancing at the Friendship Center, and that's our group that's dancing and singing, and that's hosting that day. So you'll see her dancing her song in that video. So so a nod to our urban Kwakwaka'wakw. So yeah.
And if I could just add one little thing too about this hat here is growing out of this urban group, this discussion of healing and finding connections to community is so important to many young people. And this is Avis O'Brien, who was also a member of the urban dance group and at the same time was learning cedar bark. And she talked a lot about the spirit of suicide and how her work with the dance group and weaving has allowed her to become a healer, working with youth who are on suicide prevention. So there's so many layers to what a strong sense of belonging and where the recordings of Ida Halpern have led to people relearning their dance, their regalia, their sense of belonging. And thank you, Cheryl, so much for helping us connect to those. Now, I'm just going to invite you to come into the Hummingbird Room if you still have time. We are happy to answer some questions. And there's also a little sewing activity you can do on a button blanket. And there's also a wonderful film by Barb Cranmer, which really helps bring the discussion of potlatch all together. So for those of you who have time or have questions, please come on in. I know this woman here at the front of the room just told me that she knew Billy Assu personally. Would you mind sharing just a little bit?
I grew up in Cape Mudge, in Kwakwaka'wakw Cove, sorry. And Billy Assu was the chief at the time. And my father was the manager of EC Packers Cannery at the time. And so we were with Cape Mudge a lot. And I still kept in touch with a lot of the elders. Ruby Wilson was my elder contact, but she's since passed away. But I continued to go, and I visited Harry Assu. I went to see Harry Assu's funeral. I knew Sonny's mother and father because they lived in Richmond. But yeah, they did give me a First Nations name, which they had a small potlatch. I have the letter to that. Yeah.
Was that before the potlatch ban ended?
During the potlatch ban.
Oh, wow.
It would be.
Wow.
It would be. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a wonderful story. Thank you so much for coming today.
Yeah. Well, I just thought I'd see you out there. And I know that picture because I've seen the picture. It's one of his with his headdress on. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other questions that anybody has? I mean, we've talked a lot. Did you?
Question about there's a lot of Indigenous art in the community. There's a lot for sale. There's a lot. I've been reading about it shouldn't really be sold. It's more of a gift. Can you explain how we should respect those artifacts that have been? Yeah.
I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
The issue of appropriation and the sale of Indigenous art within the community, and is it appropriate for people, and how should we respect art? So there'd be art made for sale and art made for sale.
Right. Maybe it'd be best to hear.
Okay. So my understanding is that, I mean, there are many historic pieces that are art pieces that have been made for ceremonial purposes, and that is not appropriate for people who are, people have the rights to those materials. But there are many wonderful artists working, Cheryl is one of them, and who are making artworks that are made for sale. They are not meant to be used in ceremony, or they're not meant to be, they're modifying them a bit to make sure that they're putting out crests or designs that are appropriate for general use. So there's no problem with purchasing those sorts of things and enjoying them as art pieces and supporting the community members and artists that way. But we do also recommend that you purchase from Indigenous artists. There are artists out there who are copying Indigenous designs, but they actually are not Indigenous, and it's not part of their tradition. So there is we call that appropriation, and it's a big problem in the community that there are people passing themselves off as Indigenous artists and or producing work overseas and bringing it back mass-produced and selling it that way. Anything else? Sorry.
I can also add to that too, so thanks, Beth. I am a wood carver. I do paint as well. So I was taught by my uncles how to do these, how to design, how to use my tools. In a traditional sense, that's how it was passed down, so from family member to the next generation. So there are artists out there, and many artists, they make traditional regalia. So they make the headpieces, they make the masks that are used during ceremony, and those are put away for the families. And then there's artists, the same artists as well, make art for commercial art galleries for sale. So, and those are made in a sense in a traditional way, traditional design and concept, but it's for commercial sale only. So.
The reason why I asked that, thank you. The reason why I asked that question is because years ago we received a piece of carving, and we wanted to sell it. So we put it on Craigslist, and it was by an artist by the name of Joseph from Squamish Nation. And that person contacted me, and he wanted to buy it back. And I said, I'm not going to sell it to you. I'm going to give it back to you. Because he said, I'm just trying to find my pieces that have been out there for so long. So that's what got me thinking, like, what is appropriate? So here's somebody, an artist, who wants to purchase back his family's, however he can find it. And I don't know, I just wanted to find out what was the best way to deal with that.
Well, great.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
A funny story is that, that's a bit of a common. Bill Reid himself, who we're named after, also purchased back works that he had given away as gifts later in life. So artists, when you're young and you're making a lot of things and you give them as gifts or you sell them, and then later in life it's like, oh, I wouldn't mind having some of those back or knowing where they've gone to. Any other questions? Well, we can continue to chat, but thank you everybody for joining in today. Thank you for staying a bit over time, and thank you to Cheryl and Michael for all their hard work on this exhibition and for making it really, really special, and we really appreciate you coming out today.